Hello, Chris Howard from Lace Partners, and welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. It's me, and I am doing a video today with two of our AI specialists. I've got Martin Colyer. How are you doing, Martin?
Very well, thank you.
And I've got a fabulous Charlie Frox back again. You all right, mate?
Good, thanks.
Gents, you two have been busy beavering away in Lace Towers, looking at a framework that we've created, particularly in the AI space. That's our topic for today. So what I wanted to do is take maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes just to chat through that. We'll go through that in a second. But this is the HR on the Offensive podcast, and we have a little tradition, and it is our fundamentally different question. It is random, and it is not related to HR. Before we get into the detail of our trusted framework, let's do that first. And it's an article that I just read, and being a cat man myself, I know that cats are afraid of cucumbers. And this article goes into the detail as to why they're afraid of cucumbers. I won't draw that out much longer, but it made me think, I wonder if there's a fruit or vegetable that would terrify any of our guests on HR on the Offensive, or just you don't like it. So I'm going to kick off with you, Martin. Talk to me about a fruit or vegetable that you either cannot stand or are afraid of.
I've had a lifelong fear of bananas.
Really?
Not stand the smell. They make me heave. It actually goes through my family as well. So maybe it's hereditary. Who knows?
Yeah, hereditary fear of bananas.
There you go.
And my wife has the weird thing where she likes bananas but not banana-flavoured things.
Well, okay.
Go figure. Charlie, what are you hitting us with?
Think for me, it's not as interesting as that one, but I would say durian fruit, because it smells really bad, fleshy texture. I would imagine, well, to myself, but anyone else as well, pretty off-putting.
Yeah, and mine, just to complete the trio of terrible fruits or vegetables, although we've all gone fruits here, is dragon fruit. I actually don't mind the taste. It just looks a bit terrifying, and it looks like it's from Avatar. We were just talking about this just beforehand. It looks like it's from the movie Avatar, this kind of pink with these little sort of nodules on it and green bits on the top. So yeah, that's mine. That's my random one. Can't have bananas though, because I do like a banana. I do like banana flavoured things. I will never try durian, I've got to say, just because of that kind of that smelly stuff. So I get to pick the winner, and I'm gonna pick dragon fruit because it's a show, and I want to. So right. So let's talk about this trusted framework. So we talk with HR teams, with CPOs, CHROs all the time. I feel like AI is a word which, when you say something so often, it then just becomes meaningless. I feel like with some people, it feels like that. But I wanted to quiz you guys on it because you recently wrote a blog on our website. You talked through the trusted framework, is what we call it. It's technology, regulation, usability, security, transparency, ethics, and data. So what I want to do, and maybe we just riff off of you guys, let's go through each of these different parts. But then I also want to talk about the practicalities of this, because I do feel like sometimes people look at consultancies and think, oh, look, a consultancy's come up with another framework and another lovely imagery or a visual that looks great. But let's talk about some of the practicalities around it as well. I'm going to start with you, Charlie, on the trusted side. So let's just walk through why we've selected these as our framework, if you like, and the impact that they have and what businesses need to be thinking about.
Yeah, no, let's do that. So the framework is something that we've come up with because it's come out of a lot of conversations we've been having with existing clients and also leaders in the space. And one of the themes that kept coming up is that there's, as you pointed to, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of new information, it's a new topic area. What we wanted to do is create a framework that could be used almost like a maturity assessment type tool, be something that organizations, regardless of where they are on their journey, if they're still thinking about moving to the cloud, whether it's wherever they are on their HR tech journey, or if they are, one of these frontier firms really looking to push the boat out, they can use this tool to be able to assess where they're at. And use it as a bit of an assessment. They can look at these different areas, and what we're trying to say with this framework is these are all the different areas, the different buckets that when you're thinking about deploying or implementing an AI tool within your organization, whether that's a small individual tool or whether that's something full suite as part of your HCM or payroll system, you think about these areas within the trust framework to make sure you get that implementation right. And we, as part of that, why it's focused around that word of trusted, is that we're trying to say is that by considering all these areas, you can then make sure that the deployment is employee-centric and you're keeping the employee, the workforce at the center of that implementation.
Okay. Any sort of bits to add on to that before we get into the actual individual bit of the acronym?
And Charlie's done a very good job explaining that. But I think building on it, I think what we're increasingly seeing is that there's, to your point earlier, it's becoming a bit of noise, and therefore there's a lot of businesses that are almost getting busy, but not necessarily with a direction, or actually, we're seeing a whole host of organizations that are going through pilot phases, but without necessarily any, objectives or aims or success criteria. So this is trying to put a frame around that, and at the heart of it is the word trust, because I think that's going to become critical, because it is one of the things that is most pertinent, and I guess as a key topic of conversation. But also to your point earlier about what practically do you need to do, and under each of these, there's then a sort of a step-by-step walkthrough of, well, is it a technology concern that you need to address, or some, foundation pieces? Is it aspects of regulation? So we'll talk through those, but it's trying to give you some very practical steps that will go through them. And equally, nobody is ever going to be perfect from the start. So each of them will be probably on a continuum. And with some of them, they might even be different by different parts of the globe. There could be different employed populations. There's a whole host of different things, but they offer a lens to each of them, and therefore some practical steps that people can go through.
Okay, cool. So let's kick off with that acronym. Who wants to take technology then?
Go.
I love the way you just both looked at each other like lovingly. It's like, do you?
It is unplanned, but yeah.
There we go. So I think we've started with technology because I think it's not an end point, but it's certainly critical. So when we get to the final part of the acronym, we'll see why that it there's a sandwich to it. But the technology is where a lot of the capability is going to come from in the first place. So it is, what is the foundational technology that is underpinning the ecosystem with which your organization operates within. So starting to take a view of, because again, a lot of what we're seeing is that there might be pockets of AI that is being introduced either by vendors that's inherent within their products, or actually a need and a specific use case to develop some form of agentic, we talk about agents an awful lot at the moment. So the different types of applications that you might want to apply it to. So really what we're trying to do with that is to give a basis and a foundation as to where an organization is relative to the different aspects of the technology that might be needed, or some of the interventions that you might want to consider, and look at where you might be able to optimize what you're doing, or actually where you might need to invest further. So yeah, we start with the technology as a start point, but it is a start point.
Cool. And Charlie, you can build on that if you want, or you can go straight to the regulation part.
I think regulation, big good one to jump into. And when we're talking about with the regulation piece, is this has come up quite a lot. We've spoken to HR leaders, is that actually, as Martin said, the focus is on the tech and diving straight in first on the tech. But what we've really observed is that regulation isn't maybe coming up on the agenda as much as it should be. And some examples of the AI regulation that should be front and center for CPOs, for people leaders, is things like the EU AI Act, which is going to put requirements on organizations to be transparent in their use about AI, that they're conducting impact assessments, the impact of the use of these tools on their employees. And one of the other things linked to the regulation is around governance. So do you have the right governance in place within your organization to respond to this regulation? Do you have the right oversight? We cover that in a few of the other areas of the trusted framework, but actually, are you considering what governance forums cross-functionally, and we're not just talking about HR here, across HR, tech, legal, audit, data, how do you bring the right stakeholders together to make sure that you're compliant, but also you're being proactive in responding to this space? Because as we all know, the technology is one thing where it's changing rapidly. The regulation is as well. So it's something that I think out of all of the areas of the trusted framework that actually probably needs to be one called out, that organizations need to bump up their priority list a bit.
So can I ask you both actually, and maybe stick with you, Charlie, but then go to Martin. Why is it that organizations are overlooking or perhaps not leaning into the regulation side? Is it because, you just referenced there, it's not just a HR thing, this is a business-wide thing, and so is it an ownership issue? Or what is it? Why are businesses not spending more time looking at this
I think it's a really good question. I think you touched on it there, is that actually because there's different areas of ownership within the AI space, technology and data are ones that you would come to mind. But actually, it's this need to bring the functions together. And actually, in a lot of instances, what we're seeing is that organizations are considering, maybe they're looking at use cases, maybe they're looking at existing systems of where can we put AI in place. And that's something that should be encouraged to start to build that muscle memory, which is something we've talked about at least more recently, is that is a good thing to start to focus on the tech side. But actually, it's taking the step back of looking at the practicalities, which is what the trusted framework's trying to do. I think the other reason why it's maybe not number one on the agenda is that the regulation has been brought in, so stuff like the EU AI Act has been signed into law in the last year or so. But actually, when the enforcement of that regulation comes into place, it's not, for towards the end of this year, next year. And that's why I think some of it hasn't come to head for a lot of organizations, because there seems to be this lead time. But actually what we're trying to highlight here is that organizations need to get ahead of that. There's training requirements, there'll be process requirements, governance requirements. And now's a good time to start to focus on that.
Yeah, it feels like, so one of the questions I want to ask you guys, but maybe we get through the rest of the acronym first, is kind of questions to ask yourself or practical things that you can do next. But let's park that and move, Martin, onto the usability side. What are we talking about here? What's our advice and guidance that we're giving to not just HR teams, but businesses as well?
So underneath usability, I guess we're broadly talking about experience. So it's trying to, again, be very practical and begin to think through the impacts on the, your customer, your consumer of these services and what that's actually going to mean to them. So again, we have seen and we've learned an awful lot over the past 10, 20, 30, 40 years that if we can just put a piece of tech on top of a process, it's not to solve the problem.
Yeah.
It might just dilute, diverge, change the issue, and actually often you're getting people then are frustrated within the process. And I guess where we see this in particular now from a usability point of view is that the usability of AI is going to be more of an interaction. So this isn't like an interface, it's an interaction, because you've got be it an agent, some form of machine learning, and it is going to be intrinsic within part of an application potentially. So how that impacts a person and how it impacts their work and day-to-day life is just going to become critical, because if not, and we'll come to it, because a lot of this does underpin by data, either the data that's going into the particular application with which AI might be part of, or an agent. If that's not sufficient, if it's not in a good enough state, if it's not been interacted with, then actually the bot itself, the agents, the piece of AI is not necessarily going to learn, or if there's another aspect of AI that's sat in another part of an application, be it sort of whether it's in dashboarding or something like that, it's all looking at how we are interacting with it, and therefore the interaction will in time become better. So how usable is it for the person and the other end of that, the experience?
Yeah, and this is an interesting point. I've just been reading, I can't remember the exact statistics, but CEOs looking at the usability and how many people within my business are actually adopting, or how many people actively are fighting against AI, and it's differing. The data, again, I should really reference it, but I can't remember off the top of my head because it's just something I read this morning. But just this, I don't like, but it's interesting, this idea that you have different industry sectors that are embracing AI. I think financial services, insurance was mentioned as one, versus other sectors where there's a lot of reticence. And then also on a functional level as well. So HR versus IT versus marketing versus customer service.
And there's a couple of things to build on, again, to your point, is that, well, if a measure of success is interaction because it's of adoption and therefore theoretically what a business or investment case is being built around, then if it's not being used, then you're not realizing the potential of the investment. So that's one significant point. So really thinking about that, and that's not necessarily new, but actually it's become more manifest as we move through and start to move into more of an AI driven world. The other side of it, I guess, is from a usability point of view, and it's not just in terms of, as I'm calling it, interaction over interface potentially, but more on the impact of the role that somebody is performing. So this is underpinning this. There is a whole swathe of different implications to looking at the types of roles that might be performed, and therefore how a an agent, if we use that example, how that would then interact with the role and the tasks that are actually being performed. So there's work to, and it brings back to what's the experience, what's the usability to make sure the adoption happens. But actually that's only going to happen if you understand how it's being used by who and how they work.
Yeah, and if you have that understanding, the how's it working, how's it impacting my job, I guess this leads us as a nice segue, Charlie, into that second T, which is around the transparency side. And I mentioned you've got people actively fighting against it. I wonder if you were to ask some of the people that might have been surveyed around why they are potentially reticent or fighting against it, there's probably an element of transparency too. So can you talk about that second T for me, Charlie, that transparency piece?
Absolutely. And I think transparency is a really key part of the framework. And as you say, if people don't have the trust in an AI tool, you're not going to get the adoption, you're not going to see a return on investment. It's all the big focus of AI. It's the opportunity, is how can we, see efficiency gains or improvements in experience. I think something linked to this is there's a really interesting talk I listened to the other day from an academic from, I think it was Princeton. It was around actually a lot of the time at the moment the focus is on capability of AI systems. So how capable is it? How capable is it at answering queries or solving a process that a human would otherwise be doing? But actually the important piece isn't on capability, it's on reliability. Capability is how good something can be at its best. Reliability is how often it can hit that high level. And so the example they gave, and I think it's a really good one, is that if you were using an AI tool to, say, help you book a holiday, if it was right 80% of the time, that's quite a big failure. Because 20% of the time, your details are wrong, you end up on the wrong flight.
Yeah.
The same instance, if you're using a chatbot even for something like you want to book leave, or maybe it's part of the performance process, it's helping you do a bit of self-evaluation. If it's wrong 20% of the time, it's a really poor employee experience. And actually then your trust in the system, your reliance on it, your propensity to actually want to use that AI tool would instantly drop off. So I think one of the things that we would just highlight as part of this is that, yes, you should be thinking of what could a tool do, but as part of the building the trust into it, actually you want to make sure this tool is well tested. There's transparency on how it's been tested and how it's been built. And there's transparency in how the answers are generated, so employees feel that they are using something that is a net benefit to them, not just a piece of tech replacing what might be a human interaction.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. I was just thinking as you were talking there, imagine there's 100 processes, let's use that example, 100 processes, and if 80% of them are working perfectly fine, you're not going to think about those 80% because it's just like, it's a bit like payroll, like you get paid and you're happy. As soon as it breaks, then there's a problem. But it doesn't matter that it's broken like once in a blue moon. That's the bit that you focus on, right?
And past that in transparency is actually, the analogy that I often use is it's understanding the workings. Because I think one of the things that, is a question for many at the moment is, well, this feels like a bit like a black box. So how do I understand what the black box is doing?
Mm.
And for those that are old enough and as old as I am, I remember, having to learn what, showing my workings, going through long divisions, that at which point it then becomes reliable to talk about the reliability of that so that it's repeatable. And that within a tolerance, I will get most of those. I didn't, because I was rubbish at it, but within a tolerance that it would complete the transaction or the process, to your point, within a scale and reliability. So there's something within it. That's what bringing out transparency. Now, not to say you have to take that to its nth degree to understand the algorithm within, within an absolute, but certainly that there's an awareness, because one of the things we'll come on to is, these are very interlinked, is if you don't understand and it starts to, potentially give you erroneous outcomes, then it can start to lead to, a downward spiral of adoption, or even worse, things like bias and some of the other pieces as well. So that's where we're trying to get to, is at least have it as an awareness to ask those questions around, can you demonstrate what and how the transparency is at least reported or, looked at.
Yeah, brilliant. Right, let's move on to E, which is ethics. I'm going to go Charlie and then Martin. Martin's kind of hinted there a little bit on the D element, but we can't miss out the ethics side, can we, Charlie? So what are we talking about there?
So I think it links really well to the transparency piece, but I think what all employees are looking for when AI tools are being used in the workplace is that there's ethical considerations have gone into the deployment, not just, ethics in name only, that there's a real consideration for what's the impact on, as we've said, something going wrong, what data has been used, and there's some overlap there with the data piece, but how do we make sure that anything it's been trained on is fair, that the people feel that answers can be explainable. Explainable AI is a big field, a big trending topic. And I think another piece is who is responsible for that ethical piece is quite a big question. So obviously there is a really big opportunity within this example, but also more broadly, I think we should really highlight for HR to play a really significant role in the changes that will come about from AI. There's a real opportunity for a lot of HR practitioners where a lot of the fear factor is that some of those more manual jobs are being potentially replaced by AI, that actually some of these practitioners could pivot to more of that oversight role and supporting some of these tools. They might not be so much on the front line, but it's still overseeing, making sure that these outputs are ethical, that they have ethical considerations baked in. But there's also a lot of work for organizations to do to understand what to us is ethical. How does it align to our values? How do we make sure that we test and continue to test? Who validates these outputs? So there's quite a lot of considerations there that I think are quite HR focused, which previously people would say, well, this is just a tech responsibility to decide, what's a good output, what isn't.
That's really interesting. Can I get you just to riff off of that from like the HR impact on that ethical side? But there's also something that Charlie's talking about there around skills and types of talent for the future. People are looking at AI and you just think, oh, well, it's just going to be people that are going to be training large language models, or how do we implement it into our business? But there's that ethical side of it, which is quite an interesting sort of that governance side. But
yeah, and in this, there's deliberately it's quite a wide topic, because actually it is a wide consideration that we've not necessarily had to consider in such acute ways as we are because of the impacts of AI. So to that point, from an HR perspective, it's people. So it's considering what's the impact of my people, what's the impact of their careers, what's the impact of the skills that we need to support them with. What's the a huge topic at the moment is what's this going to mean for early careers and people coming into the workplace, because we need to be able to look at how we can solve for that in new types of roles that are going to be developed. Because if not, we're going to have a huge cliff edge of skills and talent because we're not necessarily going to be developing it. The reality is we'll be developing new types of talent, and the entry level of those types of roles will shift, because it's whether it would, if this, again, I think we've said on other podcasts, this isn't necessarily a new problem, it's just a new frame on an existing problem of people coming to the workplace, and it's shifting. So there is a huge response and a huge ethical responsibility that we are collectively ensuring that we have the right skills across our businesses for this to become sustainable, to make it work, and we can then evolve with it as opposed to necessarily fighting it per se.
Yep. So, final piece of the trusted framework puzzle. I'll start with you, Martin, on this one.
I was just going to come up with, we've actually talked about security.
Do you know what we haven't?
So, but actually, that's perfect, because
it's like I intended it.
It's exactly right. There's a neat segue there, because if I pick up security briefly, and I think part of what goes through this, so there's something we'll come back to at the end, but there's an element of what we're seeing, I guess, across the framework, which is the spine of it, which is very much around governance. So that's governance that is to enable as opposed to police necessarily, or maybe to do, in a safe and responsible way. So with security, I guess this again isn't a new concern, because to the point we talked about earlier in terms of regulation, then most businesses have been dealing with the different effects of data privacy, GDPR, and depending on where you are in the globe, then there'll be different considerations that will need to be looked into as part of that. But the layer that then sits on top of that is, well, how secure is my data? Do I actually understand? And we're seeing this increasingly a moment in terms of concerns about cybersecurity, and what that starts to look like. And whilst what we're talking about here is asking the right questions about understanding the way and the nature of the security is managed within whatever of the different applications, agentic, whatever, or in aspects that might be built in house. It is going to be one of those things that is going to be front and center. And what we're saying is that consider it in the round with these other topics, because if not, and it comes back to one of our earlier points about there might be different stakeholders that manage or own different parts of this framework. It's bringing everybody together. So we talk CPO, and equally we then say, well, actually that partnership with your CIO, CTO is equally important as well. So this is something that's going to be front and center of their concerns, but very much then links back to the regulation piece as well.
Yeah, and as we were talking about this just beforehand, before we went live, I was asking you both, like, is this just a HR thing, this trusted framework, or as I'm now calling it, because I forgot the S, the truted framework. But yeah, so and you know, you've sort of answered it there, that this is a collaborative thing. But Charlie, do you want to just sort of give any final thoughts on that security or data piece, or anything you want to build on from Martin's side?
I think there's a good kind of overlap between the two of them, and Martin nodded to this, is that a consideration that always comes back to the questions around, well, how we use HR data in an AI tool, how we put an AI lens on it, is that, well, do we have enough data? What's the quality of that data? In most instances, you might have, you know, what you think is quite a lot, but for some of these applications to really work, it's would not be considered a large amount of data. And then you go into the questions of, well, how we combine it with some external sources. And then that's linked to the security question. So how are you potentially merging or combining data sources? What are some of the risks that come with that? How do you make sure that your employee data covered under GDPR is secure and safe and isn't being kind of lost or you know, exported externally? And how do you make sure that, linked to the transparency piece, you can distinguish and explain where you're using different data sources, that there's no bias built in, you're doing the right testing, you're considering any impacts. So there's a really interesting overlap there. Again, it goes back to this point, it's a collaborative effort between primarily the CIO and the CPO to think about how can the two functions be working together, not to have siloed thinking, and really, you know, think about the impacts specifically on the employee, keep the employee at the center of all those conversations.
Yeah, I really like that. And we certainly champion that when we're talking about anything HR related, is the importance of thinking about the employee at the center of what, whenever you're delivering any kind of large scale change within your business. So just one final question before we wrap up, because we're almost on time, gents. Any real world examples from your perspective, and perhaps there are, perhaps there aren't, of businesses that you think are applying all elements of this trusted framework, or anything you've seen that you thought they're doing this well?
I would say that and this might be a slightly, I think we're so early in some instances of what we are seeing. We are learning as we are seeing organizations go through the changes that we are. So is there anybody that is doing this with this to 100%? No, but that's actually probably more of a function of where we are and the fact that we've got businesses at different levels of maturity. I think what we're saying with this is that, again, we're not going to get to perfection from the outset, but let's start looking at these different aspects. And there will be pockets of businesses that are doing, you know, are absolutely might have a perfect, no, perfect is maybe too strong a word, but have a very mature sort of technology architecture in place. But actually, do they have some of the other considerations around ethics and some of the transparency pieces in place as well? But probably not. So again, it's deliberately there to give a flavour of different levels of maturity, as opposed to it being a point. But is anybody doing this across all of them to a 90th percentile of what good looks like? It's too early at the moment. We're going through a cycle. We're going through an evolution.
And clients that we speak to, Charlie, like, have you seen anyone that's gold star best practice?
I think there are a lot of organizations, as Martin said, doing pockets of it. And I think maybe today,
like the TED or the RUF.
Yeah.
A lot of it has been more led on tech side, which I think is where we're trying to call out, you know, having this broader view. And again, it might come across a bit of a cop-out answer, but say even to assess that organizations are doing all of this, I think it's important to come back to this framework it's not a static assessment. The space is changing so rapidly. And actually what we're trying to encourage here is that this is something that we think organizations need to be continuously assessing across all the different metrics of the trusted framework, to think there's an emerging area, you know, agentic AI is at the front of everyone's kind of mind right now, but very soon we'll start to see more about agentic systems and agents working in systems. And then again, the requirements for organizations will change again. So this is something that will really help organizations prepare for the impact of AI and what they need to start planning for. But it's then something that needs to become part of their process, part of their routine. It needs to be baked in and as continuously happening.
I think that's a really, really good way of just wrapping up the podcast today, is this idea that this isn't right, we've now got a checklist, tick box to go through. This is actually an approach, a mindset almost to evolve and to keep yourself looking at, well, where are we at? What's the next thing to focus on? What's the next area in which we need to be looking at? Go on, Martin.
It should be a living framework.
A living framework, like that.
And it should support you through the different phases and stages that you're going through.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, Martin, thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome.
Charlie, pleasure as always.
Pleasure.
Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast as much as we've enjoyed recording it, doing it in a studio for a change, as opposed to just at home. So that's quite nice. If you want to find out a little bit more about the Trusted Framework, if you go to the Lace Partners website, if you go to the Insights section, there's a little tab, there's a little topic section. You click on AI. We've got 2 blogs on there. One which is an overarching setup for the Trusted Framework, and then the chaps have looked into the first couple of elements. And at time of us recording, we're going to look to release a bit of a deep dive onto each of the different sections. But from myself, from Charlie, and from Martin, thank you very much for listening or watching, and we'll catch you next time on the HR on the Offensive podcast. Bye-bye. Done. Bosh. Right.
Yeah.
Do you need to go? Are you free for just...
Yeah, I'm fine.
Can we do a 2-personer, just a short bit? Is that all right?
Thank you, Giles.
That was good. That was really good.
One take?
Indeed.